I'm Steph.
And I'm Jeff. Each week, we review a film that's streaming online.
As writers, we'll deep dive into the characters and plot to tell you if it's a good story.
Listen at your own risk. This review contains spoilers.
Now sit back
Relax
and
and
enjoy
enjoy
Stream
Stream On.
Today, we'll be reviewing A Simple Favor streaming on Amazon Prime.
Stephanie is a single mom with a son and a vlog. She meets Emily, a PR director at a New York fashion house, who is in a financially troubled marriage with Sean, a university professor. When Emily disappears, Stephanie puts on her detective hat and goes to work trying to find her.
A Simple Favor was directed by Paul Feig and written by Jessica Scharzer. It's based on the 2017 novel by Darcy Bell, also called A Simple Favor. It stars Blake Lively as Emily Nelson, the beautiful PR director who mysteriously disappears, Anna Kendrick as Stephanie Smothers, her single mom, best friend, and vlogger who tries to track down the clues of Emily's disappearance, Henry Golding as Sean Townsend, Emily's husband, and Andrew Reynolds as Darren, a bitchy dad at the elementary school and a frenemy of Stephanie.
So, Steph, you picked this movie. Why?
I really like dark comedies generally, and I was so disappointed with Ghost World that I was looking for a palate cleanser. I wanted another dark comedy movie, and this one got decent reviews. I like Anna Kendrick, so I figured I would check this out to see if it could cleanse my palate after Ghost World.
Interesting. Well, I'm happy to hear that Ghostword inspired you to find another movie. So, Steph, what would you like to start with when it comes to analyzing this plot?
So, the first thing that I want to discuss is this side plot that they came up with, which was really strange. And sometimes side plots, they're important to add complexity to your characters, backstory, and to just wrap around a film to add a little bit of like break from your main plot. But this side plot was disturbing and unnecessary. So the side plot was about, so Stephanie has a half brother, and it's discovered through this truth or dare moment that where Stephanie and Emily are bonding with each other and telling secrets, basically, that Stephanie slept with her half brother. Like, she said she just kissed him, but then it like progressed and she confessed that they actually slept together. And so this was this secret that was shared between them. Later on, we find out that Stephanie feels some guilt over the death of her husband and half brother because they got into a car ride after like an angry fight between Stephanie and her husband, who basically confronted her about who the father of her son was. Like, he suspected that it could be this half brother. So a fight ensued, and then he left in a huff with the half brother. They got in a car crash and they both died. And so Stephanie feels all this guilt about that. Anyway, it's this complicated backstory, and it was weird, and it didn't really add anything to the main story. And so my question to you, Jeff, is what did you think of this strange side plot of her sleeping with her half brother and maybe having a child by the half brother? Like, do you think that it added any value to the larger plot of Emily's disappearance and Stephanie investigating that, or was it just unnecessary creepy noise?
So, the presentation is fine. It's your standard onion layer plot. We're introduced initially to the idea that Stephanie's husband and brother were killed in a car crash, and then we, as the story progresses, find out more and more until the big reveal where it appears that her son is the product of an incestuous relationship with the half brother. So the presentation of this subplot is handled in a functional manner. There's no problem with that. The problem is the tone. When you are creating backstory for your character or a subplot for your story, the tone of it matters. If you're telling a comedy, even a dark comedy, there should be something amusing about about a plot line. The problem with this is it's not amusing. It's handled in a non-comedic way, and it doesn't add anything to the main plot. You could have easily just had Stephanie's husband die in a car accident. If you wanted some darker past that gives her an excuse to do some of the kind of shady things she winds up doing in the course of the main plot, you could have had a standard affair. This subplot adds a tonal dissonance that does not belong in the story they are telling.
I agree with that. This is a dark comedy, and this got too heavy into creepy, incestuous territory. And I think a much simpler thing to do, which you had mentioned, is if you wanted to give her guilt over her husband's death, she could have cheated, right? She cheated with a coworker or whatever, make it up. He drove off angry and then died. You didn't need this half brother at all. You didn't need questioning the paternity of her son. Like, we already had enough going on with this plot with Emily's disappearance and what was going on there to add in this unnecessary layer of complexity to Stephanie's character. So, yeah, that it really didn't work for me. And I think we're both in agreement that they should have thrown away this side plot.
What do you think about the non comedic aspects of this plot? We are in agreement that this subplot is one of them. I would also say that the backstory for Emily, which involves literally an evil twin and the murder of her father and a lot of dark stuff, that ultimately winds up with Emily killing her twin, none of that is presented in a comedic fashion, even in a darkly comedic one. It is presented in a standard thriller way. Would you agree with that?
I mean, it's definitely putting the dark in dark comedy, but I would say that that part fits in with the dark comedy. And here's why, because I think one of the things that this movie was doing was making fun of the evil twin trope, which we have seen enough times now in films that it is bordering on cliche. There's a quote that it's not a soap opera until someone's evil twin shows up, right? It's that idea. And in this situation, you've got the twist, or one of the many twists of this film, is that Emily is actually a twin, and she is Hope. Her name is Hope, and then she also has this evil twin, Faith. And then we find out even later they were technically triplets, but Charity died in utero. Thought there is that evil Faith and Hope basically killed Charity in utero. They're that evil, and so Hope, aka Emily, is like the goodish twin, and Faith is the evil twin. And yeah, there's arson, and they burn down the home, and this and that, and they go their separate ways. And there's a lot of stuff that ensues that leads to how Emily goes one way with her life, changes her name and goes one way with her life, and Faith goes another way. But that's how Emily is able to stage her disappearance and look like it's her that's dead, even though it was her killing her twin, is because of all of this evil twin stuff. But I think there's enough comedy in there and making fun of the evil twin trope slash cliche that I could buy that whole backstory in the context of a dark comedy. Like, to me, that was entertaining because it was making fun of itself. Like, I felt the film was self aware in that way. What are your thoughts on that?
The writer may have been self aware, but I didn't see much in the plot that made fun of that trope. It is presented fairly matter of factly. And my question to you is, do you have a specific example of how that plot line is treated in a funny or satirical fashion?
When they go back to the Bible camp, I think there are some funny moments there. And then when they go to the childhood home that's in shambles, and the mom talks about how evil these kids were, I think there's some comedic elements there. I couldn't necessarily pull out one scene right now in my head. I think it's how it ties together in the film, and it's making fun of a film like Gone Girl, right? When I think of like a parallel film, you've got a more serious film, Gone Girl, that does the same thing where you've got a woman that stages her disappearance. So it's very much on the nose, making fun of that. But yeah, I couldn't necessarily say one particular scene. It's a series of things that thread throughout the film. But I think the people that like this film are going to find it funny. They're going to enjoy that dark comedy because, and it's very dark. Like, you have to like the really dark stuff. And they're going to enjoy the way that Blake and Anna play off of one another. And I think that if you didn't find it funny, especially that the satirical elements, then you're probably not going to enjoy the film. If you found it funny, like I found it fairly funny, then you're probably going to enjoy the film more. Would you say there are parts of this film that you did find funny, or overall, just it didn't do its job for you?
Overall, it did not do its job. I found some of the first act where you really focus on the interplay between Stephanie and Emily, who are both portrayed by really accomplished comedic actresses. That was amusing. The writing is witty. You get to see how Emily is very much that stereotypical woman who's letting everything hang out. And given some of her outfits, almost literally, whereas Stephanie is presented as kind of the A personality uber mom, but with her new friend, she's able to open up. That all worked for me. So when I started this film, for about the first 20 minutes, I was like, oh, this is going to be enjoyable. It's everything after that that's very problematic. I think one of the issues is that if you are doing a story that's supposed to be comedic, there should be some kind of punchline. I will give you a good example of a dark comedy that never forgets it's a comedy, and that is Stanley Kubrick's Doctor Strangelove. The scene that I want to bring up is near the end of that film where a B 52 bomber is flying to nuke a target in the Soviet Union, which is going to then lead to the end of the world. The way the bomb run is handled is very matter of fact. Most of the crew is going through their checklists. There's a malfunction with the bomb bay doors. The pilot, played by Slim Pickens, he goes down to fix it, and he has been presented as this kind of stereotypical cowboy to the point that he is wearing a cowboy hat while flying. And he's down there. He fixes the bomb bay doors, but he's on the bomb that's dropped. It's one of the iconic scenes of cinema as he is riding this bomb down like a bucking bronco, waving his hat, yelling Yahoo, and also commenting on how sex, violence, and masculinity all kind of blob together because it really looks like he is riding a giant penis down. This is a way you handle even a dark comedic moment, is there is still that punchline. You still understand that even with all the very matter of fact scenes leading up to it, there is still a joke here. And that was my problem with this movie. The darker stuff, there doesn't seem to be anything funny about it. It's like it's been ported over from another movie. So what do you think?
Yeah, so you felt that this film was trying to piecemeal two different, like a serious psychological thriller, like a Gone Girl, in with comedy, but it was disparate. It didn't weave together well. Um, no, and when you're comparing it to Doctor Strangelove, obviously many films are going to pale in comparison because that is one of the best dark comedies. But I don't think this film is as far off the mark as you think it is. I do think that the film kept its self-awareness that it was a dark comedy throughout and wove that in. It didn't feel like I was watching two different films. I never felt heavy that it was that serious, even with going into the backstory of faith, hope, and charity, the one in utero. There was still enough there that was comedic to keep the laughs going within the genre of a murder investigation. So yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on. It goes back to whether or not this film made you laugh and did its job. And for me, it did, and for you, it sounds like it didn't. And that's what, like, comedy is very much. It's the hard thing about reviewing comedy, I think, too, because I think comedy is very much in the eyes and ears of the viewer. There are some people that find certain movies really, really funny, and movies that I don't find funny, right? That are maybe more like potty humor type movies. I tend to not find those funny, and some people find those hilarious. I much prefer darker comedies like this style. And so it's really to each their own with comedy. I don't know. What do you think?
Of course, to some degree, you could say that about any story. Every viewer or reader is going to approach any given piece of fiction from their own point of view. Some people are going to find something funny or exciting or scary, and other people are going to be have an opposite reaction. The problem with this film is something that I generally have an issue with in any sort of fiction, and that's what I call picking a lane. When you're writing a story, you should pick a specific tone that you want to maintain throughout the story. It can be funny, can be dark, scary, doesn't matter what it is. And to be clear, I am saying tone, not genre, because I like cross genre fiction. I have written some. A lot of my favorite movies mash up genres, so it's not bad. But the really good works of fiction maintain a specific sort of tone. The problem with this as a comedy, and clearly here we have a real disagreement, is that I don't feel that it maintains a solid tone. It goes from really bleak and out of place serious things like the subplot that we've talked about with Stephanie to at the end some slapstick comedy, which seemed completely out of nowhere. That was my big problem. Also, some of it just wasn't funny, but it really was jarring, the tonal changes throughout the film. But it sounds like you didn't either find it having these tonal issues or it worked for you.
Yeah, I mean, I found this film funny and entertaining overall. The only tonal thing that didn't work for me was that stupid side plot with Stephanie and the half brother. That was dumb and unnecessarily complex in a movie that had a lot of plot twists and was already complex with all these characters to keep up with and what alias is Emily using. But other than that, it was entertaining. It had this like jazzy French soundtrack and fun clothes and funny moments. And yeah, every now and again there was some slapstick, but for the most part, the comedy stayed dark in tone for me.
You mentioned plot twists. Did you find that the plot twists worked as actual twists in the sense of you're watching the movie and it suddenly veers in a direction that you had not anticipated it going? Or did you think that the film makers and the writer were making fun of the concept of plot twists?
I found they were making fun of the concept of plot twist. It wasn't like surprise plot twist where I was just like more shocked and not expecting it. Like it wasn't at the level of The Fair, which is a movie we reviewed not too long ago that I thought had an excellent plot twist in it. Um, I felt that it had a lot of twist. Like it got very pretzely towards the end, but it was making fun of the elaborate plot twist of these types of films by doing that. It got to the point where it's like, who is backstabbing who between Sean and Emily and Stephanie? And it's not twins, it's triplets. And but I felt there was that like underlying self awareness about why it was twisting so much, because it was a satire of a film like Gone Girl. What about you?
I would actually agree with that analysis because none of the plot twists were particularly unforeseeable. So I would assume the writer knew what she was doing when she put those in there. Most of them are pretty obvious. At no point was I like, oh, I didn't see that coming. But the writing is good enough that, yes, I would assume that was purposeful. Now, you've mentioned the movie Gone Girl a couple of times.
Hmm.
Having not seen that film or read the book, do you think that might be one reason why I had a much more negative experience with this?
That's interesting. It possibly because it very much is a satire of that movie or a movie like that. I think people that have seen Gone Girl or a similar type of movie first would enjoy a film like this more because it deals with a similar plot. You have this glamorous, gorgeous wife who mysteriously disappears. The husband's the suspect, which is very typical. And then all is not what it seems. We find out that she isn't dead, that she wanted to disappear, and she also has some psychopathic tendencies. Sorry to spoil Gone Girl if anybody has not seen it that's listening to us. I mean, this is a spoiler podcast, so you have been warned anyway. And it's very similar satire to that in this film. So yeah, I would be interested if you did watch Gone Girl, if you had a different sense or feeling about A Sinful Favor.
There was one other thing, and this has to do with Stephanie's character and the suspension of disbelief and how one creates it. In most fiction, there is going to be some suspension of disbelief in the sense that you have to accept that what the characters are doing is plausible, even if you, as the reader or viewer, wouldn't do it yourself. Depending on the genre, there's going to be more or less of it. So, science fiction horror, you have more suspension of disbelief because you're dealing with the fantastic. In a film like this, it's a little more constrained. I would say the fact that it's supposed to be a comedy might move those parameters of acceptable behavior out a bit because it's not supposed to be a reflection of reality like a drama might be. But I still had an issue with how quickly Stephanie gets into committing multiple felonies in her weird, obsessive quest to find Emily after Emily has gone missing and apparently died. She gets into a little bit of B&E. She steals some stuff from Emily's office. She does, I think, commit wire fraud a couple of times with how she's getting information from people. And it's not really set up at the beginning that she is that willing to break the rules. And in fact, the way she's set up is that she is that kind of rules follower. So, did that bother you at all, or did you think that even it was there?
So she was set up to be more of a rules follower, right? She's the mom that has like an oopsie jar, right? When her kid has a swear word or something. And I think that the film tried to get at this in two ways. So the first way is they wanted to give Stephanie this dark backstory to basically indicate that she all of the behavior she does to be the goody two shoes, overachieving, clean cut mom with a vlog on how to make recipes and whatnot is really to hide some of her darker past, that she's basically trying to undo that, and like a reaction formation style, and that her darker past is she's the person that sleeps with her half brother, has a kid, and lies about who the father is and marries another guy. So that was one way I think the film tried to address it. I don't think it worked though with that side plot. I think you could have given Emily a darker past by just her being someone that has affairs, which would have worked because very quickly after Emily disappears, Stephanie ends up shacking up with Emily's husband. Like, she moves in quickly on that. So you could have easily just made it be that she has this dark side of liking liking to sleep around and have affairs and whatnot. The other thing that you could say is that there is, in a dark comedy like this, where someone is going after clues to try to figure out why her friend disappeared, there is a bit of the Nancy Drew effect, where they are willing to skirt the laws, maybe some breaking and entering, but for the greater good of solving the crime. And so, can we suspend disbelief a bit because she is trying to be our plucky Nancy Drew, solving the crime where the detectives are failing? I think that could work too. And to me, if I had to go with one of those two explanations, I'd probably lean a little more towards the Nancy Drew effect versus giving her the darker backstory. But I think the film tried to do both to make it plausible why someone like Stephanie would commit some crimes to solve a crime. What are your thoughts on that, Jeff?
Those are both very good points. I would lean much more heavily on the latter point, that as a satirical look at the tropes and cliches of the thriller genre, it does make sense that your protagonist is suddenly going to go from vlogger mom to amateur Sherlock Holmes. I do agree that the subplot may have been put in there as an explanation for how Stephanie goes so quickly into this very different kind of personality than the one we are introduced to. That may be the big problem with this shift, as far as my own suspension of disbelief, is that it's fairly radical and quick. There's a lot of stuff in the middle part of the movie, a lot of character developments that I feel are completely glossed over. And that is a problem that I had with this film.
So, would it have worked better for you if she wasn't quite so goody two shoes to begin with and there was a little bit more edge to her character starting out?
No, she could have started out the way she did. What I would have liked, though, was a more gradual progression into, going from the mom who, we were introduced to her as the mom who has her mommy blog, or sorry, her mommy vlog, but is also at school volunteering for everything. It's kind of that perfect Uber mom. It should have been more than just a couple of scenes with Emily, and then suddenly she's obsessed with finding her. There is a scene in the film which I believe is shown as a flashback with Stephanie and Emily sitting together, having a drink, and they're about to kiss. That might have been a better way to go. That she gets into a relationship, she being Stephanie, with Emily. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn out thing, but something that explains why she is so obsessed with finding her.
The lesbian lover angle. Always a fun one.
Well, even in a comedy, if you're going to have characters following what would otherwise be a normal dramatic plot, I'm going to try to find the person who went missing, and I'm not going to stop at anything to do it, which is basically the plot of the film. There should be some reason behind it, some emotional connection, which I feel the two characters and the actors could have pretty easily pulled off. The character traits are there, it's just not done. That makes everything after that first act very perfunctory and by the numbers.
Gotcha. Yeah, they just didn't spend enough time creating the bond between Stephanie and Emily before Emily disappeared to justify how obsessive she became with finding her.
Do you think that that actually is an issue for you with this movie?
Not really. I mean, I do see your point, but I pretty much suspended disbelief with the whole Nancy Drew angle and it being a dark comedy, that I didn't think too much about the fact that she was breaking some laws along the way to solve the crime.
Or that she goes to such lengths? Because she's traveling, all over the country to try to track down Emily.
Yeah, I almost saw it as she's a bored mom, that basically her life revolves around her kid and her vlog. She's got some money from the, being a widow, that she doesn't necessarily have to do other work. And so it's almost like I saw it as a way for her to have a more interesting and adventurous life by becoming a private detective and figuring out what happened to her friend.
Do you think it would have helped or hurt the film if Stephanie and Sean had not become a couple? And this gets to your idea of Stephanie being, the bored mom, and not, as we get, Stephanie moving basically into Emily's position.
I would have preferred if she hadn't shacked up with Sean. I don't know if that was necessary. Again, they were folding that in with the whole issue with her sordid past, but I think it may have given her more depth of character if she didn't do that and she didn't need Sean. Maybe you could have Sean become into her, but she's not that into Sean and she just mainly was focused on solving the crime. I do think maybe that crush on Emily could have worked too. Like maybe they kissed and that gave her something, but she nothing further happened before she disappeared. And that's more what's going on. I think that could work too, but I don't think you needed her shacking up with Sean. Although they did use that to twist the plot a bunch. So that helped them get to some of the crazier plot elements.
To your point that this is kind of a satire about thrillers like this, right? Like the Gone Girl, the missing person who's not really missing or is not really dead. And I can see why, as the writer, you would put this into the movie because it's an expected trope. My bringing this up has more to do with the way it sort of scatters Stephanie's emotional connections. And if you want us to really believe that Stephanie has become obsessed with Emily, even in the context of a comedy, I think it would help to have her as the focus of Stephanie's emotional connection. That they bonded so well and so tightly and so deeply that Emily's going missing has blown a hole in Stephanie's life, and it's not being filled by Sean.
Yeah. I mean, I could definitely see that working and strengthening this movie if it was written in a way that stayed in the context of the dark comedy.
Okay, well, that's really all I have to say about the plot. So, shall we get into our wrap up and what scenes we liked most and least?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Why don't you give me your favorite scene?
So, this was a fun cameo scene. Linda Cardellini does this cameo as an artist, and I call her the angry knife artist. So when Emily was younger, she was the muse to Linda's character, and this artist created all of these like nudes with Emily, and we get to see one of the paintings hung up in Emily and Sean's house. And anyway, obviously they had a relationship, and there was a lot of energy between the two of them and feelings. And then Emily just disappeared and left this artist angry and frustrated. So she went from painting all these nudes to all she paints is knives. There are all of these paintings of her knives around, and she even has a knife, and she's just this like edgy knife artist living in the city. And it's just a funny scene that's well acted between Linda Cardellini and Anna Kendrick, and I just really enjoyed the scene. Um, and so, yeah, that was my favorite. What about you, Jeff?
I agree. That was one of the funnier scenes in the film. And if more of the humor been like that, kind of absurd with a dark edge, I would have liked this film a lot more. However, my favorite part of the film is actually about the first 10 to 15 minutes when it's almost exclusively Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively interacting. The dialogue is really well written, it's very witty and amusing. You have two really good comedians who play off each other well. So, what did you like the least?
There's this one scene where Stephanie has moved in to the house with Sean, and she is cleaning out Emily's closet and all these great clothes and then setting it up with her own. And then after she does that and rearranges the closet with her stuff, then we all of a sudden see that Emily's clothes and shoes and everything is back in the closet. And it startles Stephanie. And this is not a small closet. This is a giant walk-in closet with a lot of designer clothes, shoes, handbags, etc. So it just didn't make sense to me, even in the context of a film like this, where there's some suspending of disbelief for the dark comedy, how Emily could have snuck back into the house, gotten all her clothes, rearranged them, put them back in the closet without anybody noticing, like Sean or the kid. Like it just didn't make any sense and pulled me out of the movie. It was too overkill. What about you, Jeff?
I had an issue with how the film ended. There is an extended sequence where Stephanie and Sean are cooperating with the police because everyone knows Emily is back, but they want to arrest her. And they're going to set her up, and it involves guns with blanks and blood packs and hidden microphones. Emily somehow knows all of this and is able to divert the police elsewhere. So you can have this extended, kind of dumb interaction between our three main characters. And then it ends with Emily leaving the house and then being hit by a Prius being driven by one of the secondary characters who somehow beats all the police to this location, even though the cops and this guy were at the same place. And then there's like kind of a wrap up with each character getting like a little epilogue, which did not work and was unnecessary. So, for a film that had lost me early on, there's a lot thrown in the last 10 minutes, most of which doesn't make any sense.
I liked that moment with the hybrid where he comes and says America's hybrid, silent but deadly, and then hits Emily. I thought that was Darren, the bitchy dad friend that was he was following them on the vlog. That's how he knew where they were. It was a bit slapstick, but I still found it funny. Some of the "Where Are They Now" that they ended with, we didn't really need. They could have. I think the best place to end it would have end with the vlog. We opened with Stephanie's vlog, so ending with Stephanie's vlog, where she now also does side private detective work. That would have been a good place to end it versus seeing Emily in prison, or Sean had moved out to California and is writing his books again. Like, I didn't really care about that.
Yeah, I agree. That would have been the perfect ending. What is your final panda rating for this movie?
So I liked this film. I gave it a solid 4. I thought it was a fun, dark comedy. I liked the French jazzy music, the clothes, the humor, the satire, and the plot twist. Um, Wrapped up the mystery box. It's one of those movies that I found to be a good escape movie. You don't have to think too deeply about this one. You can just sit back and enjoy the ride into satire of a thriller. It did lose a point for me because of that weird half brother side plot that I didn't like. But other than that, I think this film's a fun one to watch, and I would recommend it. What about you, Jeff?
So I gave this 2 out of 5 pandas. I disliked it so much, I didn't even come up with any kind of funny pandas. While there is some enjoyable dialogue and some very good performances, I just found that this was not a very funny comedy, and it had a lot of plot points and elements that really did not fit tonally into the rest of the film. I know that you picked this in part to kind of make up for your disappointment with Ghost World, but I would say anyone out there who's interested in one of these films, check out Ghost World. Much better.
And I would say check out A Simple Favor. So you've been warned. See, maybe this will help inform our future ratings of who you trust for ratings in movies between me and Jeff. But it's what's interesting is, you see that, like, Ghost World scored similar, like collectively, if you kind of look at just like the internet and how these movies are scoring, right, among masses of viewers. Ghost World and A Simple Favor get a similar, like, high score amongst viewers. But there's that range of the ones that don't like it and the ones that really liked it. Okay, Jeff. Well, what do we have coming up next week?
So next week, we'll be reviewing CQ, which is currently streaming on Amazon. Stream On is a production of Steph and Jeff Wrights Media. Reproduction without written consent is prohibited. All rights reserved. 2021.